My name is Alexander Myers. I'm an economics major and I'm from San Diego, California. The title of my honors thesis is Exploring the Stability of Risk Preferences over Different Payoff Horizons. The thesis statement is if an individual experiences more temptation in one period over another period, specifically the present over the future, then they will behave in a more risk-averse manner in the present than the future. To sort of explain what that means, I sort of have to step back a second and realize that individuals are generally assumed to avoid risks. And the reason for that is that we experience what's called the diminishing marginal utility of money. And the concept is if you're very wealthy, $1 doesn't really give you that much utility. But if you're very poor, it gives you a lot more. And so one of the things is that even if people are risk averse, if they're dealing with really small gambles, like a coin flip for $1 if it's heads or tails, gambles that compared to their lifetime wealth are really small, then even though they are risk averse in general, for that gamble they will behave as though they were risk neutral. And what risk neutral really means is that so long as there's an expected value that's positive for the gamble, they will take it. Or if they're evaluating two different gambles, they will prefer the one that if they average out, the expected winnings would be slightly higher. That's the one that they would prefer. If they're given a 50% chance of winning $1 million or losing $500,000, even though that has the expectation that they will win some money, the loss of $500,000 would be so catastrophic that they wouldn't take that. You wouldn't take that bet because you're risk averse. And so the issue is that in laboratory experiments, we would expect that people, even if they're risk averse for large gambles, would be risk neutral for the small gambles. And so I came up with a theory that explained some anomalous laboratory results of risk aversion over small stakes. And the way it explained it is by saying that even though mainstream economic theory assumes that if, for example, you received an unexpected winning of $80 in a period, the main economic theory assumes that you would spread that out over your lifetime. You would reintegrate it into your optimal consumption stream. And so temptation is sort of a concept that means that you don't do that. Instead of spreading it over a lifetime of periods, you might spend it over 5 periods or 6 periods, or maybe 1 period. You might just go out to the store and buy a candy bar because you're hungry. That's the concept that I'm sort of tapping into. And so my hypothesis is basically that when people have more temptation, when they're hungrier and more likely to go, after the experiment and go get a candy bar, that they will behave in a more risk-averse fashion. And one way to think about why that would be is that let's say you're sitting in the experiment and you're starving and you have the expectation that you're given the choice of a 50% chance of getting $30 and a 50% chance of getting $40, or a 50% chance of getting $70 and a 50% chance of getting no dollars. Now, in terms of the expected value of those two lotteries, they're the same. On average, you're going to get $35. But the point is that if you get 0, you can't go get a sandwich. And that's unfortunate for a hungry person participating in the experiment. So I guess that's sort of one way of understanding what temptation means and how it would relate to risk aversion. Most economists are interested in modeling real-world situations with lots of people or businesses or situations where it is reasonable to expect people to behave rationally. There are other economists that are part of a field known as behavioral economics that look at what do people actually do, at least in laboratory experiments, and how does that relate to what we think they should do. And so that's sort of the vein that my thesis is in. It's an experimental thesis conducted on Amherst College students, and basically it gave them options for lotteries to participate in with different probabilities and payoffs, and it asked them to choose which one do you want, and with the caveat that there's a chance that you'll actually get the money that you are choosing between. And so the goal of that obviously was to keep them honest. What do they really want? And so that's sort of where why the temptation appears, because when you deal with real behavior, real situations, you have to account for why didn't they do the prediction? Why didn't they behave hyper-rationally? And so temptation is one attempt to explain that. There's one professor, one of my readers, I met with him the other day, and the meeting took the tone of being very critical of my work. And so it was sort of an intense meeting. And so he said, look, I just want you to know, I'm taking the position that a referee for a journal would take, because we were talking about potentially publishing it. And I said, oh, you know, that makes a lot of sense. You know, thank you for giving me the hard questions that I would have to explain if someone were evaluating my work. And another professor told me that that's what the thesis defenses are for. That's what the questions are about. Through doing my thesis, I became really, really interested in doing research, which it's not that I didn't like it before, it's just I'd never had the opportunity to actually do my own research. And so I'm sort of feeling that I'm leaning towards graduate school at some point in the future. In terms of short-term goals, I'm definitely going to continue working on my thesis, do some more data analysis, rewrite it, and then see if I can get it published in a journal. I think that a lot of things that were significant about my Amherst College experience manifested themselves in my thesis. So specifically, I wrote a behavioral economics thesis, and that's not really normal or standard for an economics thesis. And that sort of has to do with me, you know, through college figuring out what it is that I want, what it is that I like, that I'm interested in. And so, you know, instead of writing, it would be the equivalent of when I was a sophomore, I wanted to go into investment banking because I thought that's what you do, that's what you're supposed to do. I had found this field, I ran with it, I wrote my thesis on it, and in many ways, you know, the sophomore version of me wouldn't have done that, for example. On another level, I think my thesis will be really significant in as much as I have a really strong feeling that the process of writing my thesis has sort of nudged me on a different track for where I go from here. And so that, you know, in that sense, it's almost the most important part of my college experience, in as much as I think after honing in on what really interests me and what excites me intellectually, the thesis really gave me the answer to that.